All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we are diving deep into the plant kingdom, its incredible evolutionary story. I mean, think about it. We're going on a journey all the way from these tiny, single-celled things just floating in the ocean to the massive, complex giants that, and this is no exaggeration, literally built the world we live in today.
So, what is a plant? I know, it sounds almost too simple, right? It's green, it's got leaves, it grows out of the dirt. But when you really dig in, the answer? Wow. It's this epic story of survival, of just mind-blowing innovation and adapting when the odds are completely stacked against you. This isn't just botany. It's the story of how the very ground we stand on came to be.
You know, there's this quote, "Keep cutting us. It makes no difference. We have our own defense system." And that, right there, that gets to the absolute core of what makes plants so unbelievably tough. To make it on land, they couldn't just exist, they had to fight. They had to build up their defenses. It's kind of like they're wearing multiple layers of armor against, well, everything, from hungry animals to the harsh sun.
Okay, so here's the plan. We're going to see how we classify them, take a trip from their waterlogged beginnings onto dry land, check out the game-changing seed and flower revolution, and then wrap up with why plants basically run this planet.
All right, first up, a kingdom of survivors. I mean, before we can even get into the story, you have to ask a really basic question that scientists wrestled with. How in the world do you start organizing this vast, messy, beautiful kingdom of life?
So, at first, the approach was, well, pretty superficial. You had brilliant minds like Aristotle and Linnaeus, and they were basically sorting plants by what they looked like on the outside. You know, this one's tall, this one's purple. And look, it was a start, but it's kind of like organizing your library by the color of the book covers. The real revolution was natural classification. This is where people like Bentham and Hooker said, hold on, let's look inside. They started digging into the anatomy, the internal plumbing, the actual family connections. And that is what gave us the true family tree, the real story of how they're all related.
Okay, so where does it all begin? Well, like so much of life on this planet, our story starts in the water. We need to talk about the ancestors of every single plant you've ever seen. And that means we're talking about algae.
And look, when we say algae, don't just picture some green slime. It's this huge spectrum of life. We generally break them down into three main groups based on their color, which is actually super important. It tells you where they live. The green algae, with their chlorophyll, hang out near the surface, soaking up the sun. The brown algae go a bit deeper. And then you have the red algae. These guys are the deep sea divers, able to survive way down where there's hardly any light, all because their unique pigments are experts at catching whatever little scraps of light make it down there.
And their bodies are perfectly designed for that aquatic life. It's what's called a thallus, basically a simple, non-specialized body. Think about it. Why would you need roots if nutrients are just floating all around you? Why would you need a tough stem if the water is holding you up? It's brilliantly efficient for the water. But as you can imagine, this very simple design was going to be a huge problem for any plant that dared to try and live on land.
And that brings us to our next chapter, the Great Leap Out of the Water. This was, a monumental moment, because suddenly, you're not floating anymore. You've got gravity pulling you down. You have to find water instead of just being in it. And you have to deal with the sun trying to dry you out. Solving these problems, that was going to take some serious, and I mean serious, evolutionary innovation.
So you can really picture this whole process like climbing an evolutionary ladder. Down at the very bottom, that's our foundation, the algae in the water. The first step up, the first ones to make it ashore, those are the Bryophytes. And then, the next rung up, we get the Pteridophytes, and these guys evolved a kind of superpower that completely changed the game for plant life.
So these first pioneers, the Bryophytes, we're talking about things like mosses here. They're often called the amphibians of the plant kingdom, and that analogy is just perfect. Because yeah, just like a frog, they could live on land, but they couldn't leave the water behind completely. They were still tied to it, especially to reproduce. That's why you always find mosses in these damp, shady spots. They're still clinging to the edge of the aquatic world. Okay, so here comes the next huge leap forward. This was the real game changer. The Pteridophytes, think ferns, they evolved something incredible. The very first vascular tissues, basically an internal plumbing system. Suddenly, they could pull water up from the ground and send sugars down from the leaves. This meant they could grow tall, away from the damp ground. They could develop true roots to anchor themselves and find water, and they could spread out big leaves to grab as much sunlight as possible. This was a revolution.
Now, there's this really cool biological trick that plants have called alternation of generations. It sounds complicated, but here's the gist. Their life cycle has two different stages. There's the gametophyte phase and the sporophyte phase. Now, in the early plants like mosses, the main green part you see is the gametophyte. But the big evolutionary trend, the secret sauce to conquering land, was the switch. Over time, the tougher, more durable sporophyte phase became the main event, the dominant part of the plant's life. And that shift, that was absolutely crucial for surviving the harsh realities of life on land.
So, plants are on land, they have plumbing, but they're not done yet. The last pieces of the puzzle, the adaptations that would lead to total domination of the land, were two of the most brilliant inventions in the entire history of life on Earth: the seed and the flower.
Okay, so the seed. This little package of life was revolutionary because it freed plants from needing water to reproduce. It's like a tiny spaceship for a plant embryo. The first group to figure this out were the Gymnosperms. Think of your classic pine tree. Their name literally means naked seed because their seeds are just out there, exposed on the scales of a cone. But then came the Angiosperms. They took this incredible idea and perfected it. Their name means covered seed, and they invented the ultimate VIP protection for their seeds, the fruit.
And this is where the sheer genius of the angiosperm strategy comes into play. First, they developed flowers, these bright, beautiful advertisements to attract animals, basically tricking them into becoming a pollen delivery service. Brilliant, right? But then, after fertilization, they created the fruit. And the fruit is a bribe. It's this delicious, nutritious package that's designed to be eaten so that an animal will carry the seeds inside far, far away and deposit them with a little bit of fertilizer. This one-two punch was so unbelievably successful that angiosperms just took over and became the dominant plants all over the planet.
So, let's just take a breath. We've gone from simple algae all the way to complex flowering trees. After seeing that incredible journey of adaptation, we can really start to get our heads around just how critical these ancient survivors are to, well, to everything. 50%. Just let that number sink in. What that means is that half of all the carbon dioxide fixation on the entire planet is carried out by algae. The process that literally makes the oxygen we need to breathe. Half of it comes from the simplest, most ancient plants living in the ocean. They are, in a very real sense, the lungs for half the world.
And their importance just explodes from there into every single corner of our lives. I mean, the food we eat, plants. The fodder for the animals we rely on, plants. The fuel we burn, the fibers for our clothes like cotton, so many of our most powerful medicines, it all comes back to plants. They're the foundation of almost every ecosystem. They hold the soil in place. Our entire civilization is quite literally built on the back of the plant kingdom.
You see, this whole evolutionary saga, it isn't just a history lesson. It's a masterclass in solving impossible problems. It's a story of endless innovation. And that's why it's so relevant today. As we're facing our own massive challenges, climate change, resource scarcity, it forces us to ask a really important question. What other secrets, what other solutions does this ancient, resilient, and brilliant kingdom still hold for our future?